When we're looking at our rate strategies in the winter time, we're looking at those tenants that quote unquote don't belong, and we're trying to get them to move out. When it comes to the spring and summer, if you don't have any availability, you're dead in the water. Don't just think because, a competitor selling at 50% of what you are and you're 90% full that you have to lower your price. If you're at 90% full of that unit type, you've got demand.
And talking about that, both from like a marketing and a rate and revenue management standpoint, like what are the metrics that matter? Like what should I as an operator or manager or owner, what should I be looking at? Welcome everybody to the Self-Storage Income Podcast. You have got an incredible episode coming your way today. You've got myself and our one and only Jesse Harmon in the house today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Heck yeah. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Awesome topic to talk about today, especially as we're right now, the recording of this episode, we're heading right into busy season.
Oh yeah, we are.
We're like right there. So really excited to dive in. We're going to be talking today a little bit about self-storage seasonality, what it looks like. We're talking occupancies, revenues, marketing, some of those different elements and the ebbs and flows of what that looks like, things you need to be looking out for and considering, give you some insights into, how we manage things, what we look for and what we do. And Jesse Harmon is the subject matter expert in all those things for us. So
yeah. This is going to be an awesome podcast. This is super important. You can't fail at this, right?
No, it's huge.
As AJ, when he comes into meetings, like if we're going to execute, it's this strategy right here because it'll make and break your entire year.
Yep. No, it's so true. And not just the existing year, but for years to come. If you're not capitalizing on the busy season, you're not maximizing during the slow seasons, that can really put you down for years, right? So especially if you have, like we've seen recently, we had a year that was, busy season was like non-existent.
Yeah.
And so, man, it really, really can take you hard. But anyways, with that said, let's talk about the historical occupancy trends. How have those fluctuated seasonally for us? Looking back at, some of our properties, facilities throughout the years, what does that typically look like? What does seasonality, even from an occupancy standpoint, look like?
Seasonality, typically we break it down to 2 seasons, but there's really 4. In the wintertime, you are going to see a dip in occupancy. And if you're like us, you're going to see a bigger dip than most people because we are really hitting hard the rental raises during the winter, and there's a reason for it. And some operators, they don't want to play that game. But where we come from, Cedar Creek, it's super important for us because we understand that is when you're really going to optimize the revenues coming in. And so in the wintertime, you're going to get that dip, and it's just transactional. Self-storage typically is based on school calendars and moving and that sort of thing. In the winter, you just don't see a whole lot of that, right? So typically, you're going to have less leads coming in. Now, there are some markets like Florida, Arizona, the Sun Belt, Hawaii that this
got
may
the nice
not
weather.
that may not get as much as of this, but for most of North America, you're going to see in the wintertime less leads come through, and you are going to see a dip in occupancy because as you're doing your rental rate strategy, people are going to move out, and you're not going to be able to fill those units as quickly. Yeah,
no, that totally makes sense. And talking to that point, what have you seen to be the most effective, like pricing and marketing strategies for those units to help mitigate some of that seasonality swing?
The one thing that we always look at when anytime we're doing street pricing, promotions, even rental rates, is we're always looking at each unit type and the occupancy of that unit type. We do look at overall occupancy as a number, but when it comes down to just the micros, like we are really looking at 5x10s. What occupancy are the 5x10s at? The 7x5s, the 10x10s, the 12x10s. I mean, we have every category, and you're going to find where 10x10s, you may be 85% in the wintertime, which is very, very good. And you may be 50% of your 5x10s, right? So you're going to want to promote, and you're going to want to have your on-site team members or call center, even your website, really be attractive to those unit types that have lower occupancy, lower pricing, to make sure that you can get leads in at that. You can always upsell them into a bigger unit, But that attractive pricing is going to allow you to have a good lead flow during those times.
So good pricing. You want to make sure you're attracting people to those specific units that have the vacancy, essentially. You're trying to fill those up. What about the pricing strategies? We were talking a little bit about this before the podcast as far as having inventory ready to go for the busy season, getting people in at higher rates as opposed to keeping lower paying tenants.
There's a couple things, and you're well aware of this, Connor. Lower paying tenants, sometimes they attract crime. Typically the ones who aren't, on auto pay. You're having to make delinquent calls. All of those add up to just more and more work for the on-site team, for the home office. And so, when we're looking at getting rates optimized, and we talk about this a lot here at Cedar Creek, find the right tenant. When we say you have to be on auto pay, if people are giving us excuses, that's not a right tenant for us. We want to be 100% auto pay. 100%, that is our goal. On the first, if it's anniversary, we want that credit card being, hit. There are going to be people who have their credit cards declined or that sort of thing, or they change the credit card. We can chase those, but we want that to be the minority, not the majority. And so when we're looking at our rate strategies in the winter time, we're looking at those tenants that, quote unquote, don't belong, and we're trying to get them to move out. We are making sure if they're paying $50 for a unit that we're currently renting for $85, we're going to give them a $35 rent raise, right? Mm-hmm. We want it to be a reason for them to second guess storing with us, because we do know that we're going to get that rate. So why not get a rate that we want from a tenant that we want, rather than having to straggle along someone that we're calling, every month to make a payment or that sort of thing.
Yeah, so, who's our dream customer, right? We want those individuals, and we also want to be competitive in the marketplace. We don't want a bunch of rates that are way below market. That's not good for us, not good for tenants, any of that. So it's kind of like that rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing too.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah. So talking promotions, seasonality, we talked a little bit about getting people out, right? It's wintertime, I'm kind of getting people out, raising rates, all that stuff. Well, I guess a couple questions before we dive into this next one. What makes winter the best time to do that kind of activity?
A couple things. It's just not really nice to be going and moving out of a storage. So if you are trying to optimize your revenue, even getting someone to stay an extra month or two because the weather's not that great, that's all going to come to the bottom line. They may decide to move out, but they get it in January. They're like, okay, when the snow stops falling, I'm moving out, right? That might buy you an extra month or two of a very good rental rate that you've raised them up to. Typically, when we do aggressive rent raises, we know that we either need to get the tenant who is in that unit to a specific price or get them to move out. Because when it comes to the spring and summer, if you don't have any availability, you're dead in the water. You need to have units available coming into spring. We're right now rocking and rolling. We're getting so many leads in. It's hard for us to contact them as quickly as we want to, right?
Yeah. It's a great problem to have.
And it is a great problem to have, but we know this is the season. Mm-hmm. And so time. If we're getting people who want to pay us, $1.50 a square foot for a 10 by 20 and we don't have any, we can't build any.
There's going to the store and wanting to buy something and they don't have it, right?
Exactly.
And you're there to get something.
And you look at your rent roll and you got someone paying $86 for a 10 by 20, right? That would be on us, right? That would be on me. But
but stops with you there.
But at the end of the day, right? You're just like, holy cow, we're looking at our rent roll. We've got 6 tenants that are paying less than $100 for this unit that we could be selling, right? That leads are calling us and wanting, and we're getting a third of the price, right? So we use the winter to really dial in those segmenting and analytics and all that fun stuff that would take hours to talk about. We do that to make sure that come the peak season, we have the units available and or the prices we want available.
Dude, I love it, because that's something that, again, we've talked a lot about, off camera and outside the podcast, is as an owner, as an operator, it's okay to have vacancy.
Yeah.
As a manager of a facility, some vacancy in units is okay. Obviously, if you have 2% occupancy or something, then probably a problem. But, it's good to have that product on hand to be able to sell, get people in at those higher rates, all of those things. But there is obviously a balance. So talking data, talking analytics, how do we get the right amount of churn? Like, how do we find that little Goldilocks zone to say, hey, we want to get people out, but obviously we don't want everybody and their mom leaving and, obviously taking revenue for the facility. So how do we typically look at that and measure that?
We're in Mississippi right now, and we're turning this storage facility around. Now, lots of people are out trying to buy facilities, small ones that range everywhere from $300,000 to $4 or $5 million. Now, they're worried about getting the money or having the financing. This is why we team up with Live Oak Bank, because they get this. They understand storage. In fact, we have them help us underwrite deals for our students and others, because they are one of the best people in the industry when it comes to getting loans, especially small business loans. They can actually help the customers when they find the asset, understanding how much debt can I get? What's it going to look like? Not just because of the customer they're working with, but because of their knowledge base. That changes them from being a bank to being a real asset to the customer. We recommend Live Oak Bank to our students as well as others that are trying to get into the storage business. They have an in-depth knowledge of this asset class, so it's more than a bank. It's more than simply getting money. They're actually an asset and a partner to them, helping them go through all the things that they don't know and understand.
So when we look at like peak occupancy, 90% in the self-storage. I know 2020 and stuff, people were like 98, 99%. And
it's not 100%. Crazy times.
That would be awesome if it goes back to that way. But if you're at 90% peak season, you're doing well. In the low season, you might get down to about 80%, 82%, right? And so, when we're looking at churn and that sort of thing, and you've lived this, if we're going to do anything that's outside of our normal operating box, we test it, right? It's always good to test a segment. If you're listening to this podcast and you've never done aggressive rent raises, I get it. Like I used to have hair. I used to have hair like Connor. And
it was luscious.
It was luscious. It's stressful, right? It's stressful, especially the first time you've done it. I mean, we a few years ago, we set out to really change how we drove revenue, and we tested a market, and it was bad. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't that bad. And I don't know if you remember this, Connor, but I basically modeled 10% churn, 15% churn, all the way up to 30% churn.
Yeah,
I remember modeling 30% churn, and that was like our bend don't break. If it got to 30%, like we basically did everything for no profit. But we were used to 8% churn on our rent raises. And so when I'm modeling this thing out, even at 20% churn, we had made a ton of revenue. And so we did a test. We did one facility, and we got like 25% churn. And we said to ourselves, we still made money. We don't think that is going to be, that does seem to be like an isolated case at 25%. We feel comfortable doing our whole portfolio this way. And a side story, but a month after we went full portfolio, I mean, I walked into the CFO's office and was ready to like move out. I was like, hey, when you guys see the move out numbers, like you're probably not going to want me around, right? Yeah. But we made it as a leadership group.
Yeah.
And we stuck through it. And the proof is in the pudding, as they say. We ended up driving just a ton of revenue. We actually had the opportunity to get a lot of the, I hate to say this, riffraff out of our facilities. And then that next spring and summer, I remember sitting down with you and we're coming up with marketing plans. And I mean, we hit it hard. And that was one of the best years we've ever had.
That was
incredible. So, yeah, it was scary. And rent raises are scary when you start to do aggressive rent raises. But when you have the data to back it up, and, we're lucky to have Tenant Incorporated and Hummingbird, they allow us to see data in ways that we haven't seen in the past with their BI tools and being able to download just a bunch of reports. We are able to make actual factual data-driven decisions where I think in the past, it was more of like hey, like this is what happened in the past. And so, based on that, let's just do 8%. We know we're going to get, 7 to 8% people move out. We'll be happy with that. And when we actually started leveraging the data and the analytics and really segmenting customers, where they lived to the facility, all of that, like we started to change the tide for the company. And we've been steamrolling since.
Yeah, no, it's been incredible, man. And I think it's a really important piece to understand is that like you're not always going to have the answers. It's not always going to be a yes, raise the rates by 6.5% or by 12%, like, and have this exact understanding of where things are going to be. A lot of times it is just going to be testing and figuring out what works and what doesn't for your facility, for your ideal customer, in your ideal situation. It's one of those things where it's like, we see the questions all the time, and unfortunately the answers are usually like, well, it depends. It's so often, it really just depends on the market, the customer, the facility, the operations of the facility, what your goals are as an investor or owner, operator, manager, whatever it is you're doing. A lot of different pieces there, but let's say I'm a one facility owner operator. How might I test something like that? Like I want to see like how far could I drive rates? Like what would you do and how would you start?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing you want to do is, if you have one store, you don't have a portfolio, you need to treat it like a portfolio. And that is by segmenting and breaking out your unit types. And so when you look at your unit types, you're going to see some categories where you have more vacancy than others, right? And sometimes that might be your unit mix. Maybe you've got 50% of your property 10 by 20s, like a property we had back in the day. And you go, do we have a sales issue or do we have a unit mix issue, right? And so if you have one facility, look at your rent roll. The first thing I start to review is I start to review the average in-place rates for every unit type, because that really is going to give you kind of the bend don't break scenario with your tenants. You're going to know kind of where the line is where you can get the people paying lower than the average in-place rate up to as basically a model. And as you increase that average in-place rate, it's going to go up. You're going to see it's a moving target. It's not just one set rate for forever and it's gone. But one facility, I'd segment. I would take all the low-paying customers, and I would say, I'm okay losing these people. You have one facility, you're probably talking about maybe 5 to 10% of your entire population, right? And so, if I wasn't going to be super aggressive, what I would do is I would say, okay, if they're paying 75 and the average in-place rate is 99, I'm going to increase them to 99, right? Because you do know you have current tenants at that property averaging 99, which means you've got people paying over 99 because you've had people paying 75, if that makes sense. So you know that you're not overinflating the price, right? And so that'd be the first test I would do is I would just say, hey, 3 or 4 unit types, I'm just going to raise all these people who are paying under the average in-place rate to the in-place rate and see how it goes. Now, if I had one facility and I did that, you statutes with states and stuff, typically it's a 30-day notice you have to give them, right? If I had one facility, I would do it and I would call each one of them before they even got the letter, right? Personal service, right? Hey, I wanted to let you know we're going to be raising your rents, and you tell them why, right? And maybe you want to raise rents to slurry seal or get new doors or get better security. There's always reasons why the facility needs extra revenue. And so if you explain it to them, hey, we're trying to get better security here. You're paying on the lower end. I just wanted to reach out to you so you didn't get this and be blindfolded. And you may take some lumps, right? Some people may be like, this isn't worth it. Hey, that's awesome. Remember how we started this thing. It is okay to have occupancy dip because you know that if people are paying that price as an average, you're going to get that from someone else, right? So again, it's scary. I get it, especially when you have a portfolio of about 30 facilities and you're doing this. And in different markets and different economies. And so, it always starts out with a test. And if the test goes very, very badly, again, if that was 5% of your tenants and you're at 88%, now you're at 83% going into the strong season, you're going to get back up there.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Talking like the data that we're getting, I mean, obviously we're looking at our facility, we're looking at our occupancy statistics reports, we're looking at some of these different things that we talked about that, we have through Hummingbird and Tenant Inc. But as far as like the market and setting market rates and some of those things, what kind of data are you looking at and how are you making decisions on what kind of rates we need to be charging for the different types of seasons?
Technology is the name of the game, and how you operate your facility and the efficiency at which you can operate will depend on the technology you use. Your property management system, what it allows you to do, and what you have access will determine the outcome of how that facility performs. That's why we go with Tenant Inc. with their product Hummingbird, because they are the best in class. When dealing with automation, when dealing with move-ins, customer acquisition process, improving my online acquisition process, they are bar none the best. So if you are looking to automate your facility or operate it in a best-in-class way, make sure you guys are looking at Tenant Inc. and their product Hummingbird. The link is in the description.
There are different revenue management systems out there. We are working on one here called Now Metrics, and we can put the link in the chat. It's demoed right now. It's been a really fun project to work on. It's nowmetrics.co, and it's going to basically analyze what your store or portfolio of stores is doing based on your tenant role. It's currently looking at the average in-place rate like I talked about, and it's going to tell you money left on the table based on getting those people to the average in-place rates.
Wow.
Those are all the analytics that we look at. And it literally, for me, takes me a few days, a month to do the rent raises. We do it once a month here. And we're trying to get that done like a snap of a finger, right? Where people, when they have their rent roll, it's going to be an API through Tenant, I believe, at the get-go. So if you're on Tenant Inc., it'll all be API'd. Literally, when you log in the morning, it will tell you how much money you have left on the table because you have people paying lower than your average in-place rate.
That's awesome.
And so that's average in-place rate. Now, if you're just looking at your competitor data, there's a couple things. You can get a revenue management system, and if you have more than 5 or 6 stores, I would definitely recommend doing it, because if you're going to do this one by one, it will take you some time. But if you are a one-store operator, I would leverage Chat GPT.
Yes. Yeah.
You can find prompts out there. I know with the Inner Circle, I've given a few of them prompts that I've created for this when we're looking at acquisitions and that sort of thing. And you can very, very quickly create a web scraper for your single site store, and it'll go out and it'll do a fairly good job. You do have to go in there and take a look. If something looks weird, if you're selling your 10 by 10s for 105 and you've seen your lowest competitor at 35, you may want to go check that store out to make sure that it scraped it correctly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is some work to be done. But, when we look at occupancy at a unit group, and let's say we do have 50% vacancies, we've got 13 spaces open, we got 26 units altogether. We will move that pricing closer towards the lowest competitor pricing in that market, because we want to have a carrot to dangle to try and get people to want to contact us about that unit, right? That's a really great price, because at the end of the day, once we have that lead, we may find that they did like that 5 by 10 pricing, but they really need a 10 by 10. And that 5 by 10, because we've got so many, maybe 35, the 10 by 10 might be 90, right? In that market. And so we've just upselled that person because we gave them the low price of the 5 by 10, which is lower in the market pricing. And we actually know that they need a 10 by 10 when they start talking about having 2 couches, a fridge, and everything else, right? Because they're moving a 2-bedroom apartment. So it's always great to go out, see what your competitor pricing is, but don't let your competitor pricing be your pricing, if that makes sense. You need to make sure that the occupancy that you have at the facility per unit type is dictating your price. If you have oversupply of a unit type, I'm sorry, there's no magic button to get that price up. If you're oversupplied, you're oversupplied. You just need to get tenants at that time, right?
Yep.
And hopefully the market will raise it up. But don't just think because a competitor selling at 50% of what you are and you're 90% full that you have to lower your price. If you're at 90% full of that unit type, you've got demand. Like there's no need to. Like feel confident to keep that price high.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention too that when people are looking at competitors, we talk a lot about like competitors as well. Make sure you're really truly comparing yourself to a like asset. You're not comparing, Again, we talk about Bob's Storage all the time, and there's got to be one out there, but we talk about quote unquote Bob's Storage, being this mom and pop thing and, comparing themselves to the Extra Space down the road. It's not a like comparison,
Exactly.
right? Totally different asset classes, totally different management, absolutely different. So just make sure that you are comparing yourself to those like assets in your market. So is there a threshold at some point where the occupancy dips below? It's like, dude, if the occupancy goes below this, like that's a no-go. Like we shouldn't, do rate management as aggressively, or at what point does occupancy become like a red flag for a facility or for a unit type?
We typically here, we look at like 75% as our let's not be so aggressive with rent raises. We still do rent raises on those. When we look at doing a rent raise, and again, it's all about cadence, right? And so we typically when someone moves in, because we give them a special to move in. It's like renting an apartment or anything else. They're going to have move-in specials, and so typically our street price is our move-in special. And so when we're looking at the occupancy and the threshold at 75%. If we're at that, we're not going to give to the average in-place rate rent raise. That might be a bit too aggressive because we're trying to build on that occupancy. But if someone's paying us less than what we're current walk-in is going to get, we will send a rent raise to them to that current, right? And so, we have been known, if we're less than 75% as an overall store, to just maybe go a couple months without doing rent raises, just to build up that occupancy, right? And so, sometimes the best move is not revenue optimization. It's just, hey, let's keep our hands in our back pockets. Let's work on the lead flow. Let's make sure we're doing everything we can to entice leads and to close the leads, get them moved in. And once they're moved in and we're now at 80%, maybe we go back to doing the rent raises. Maybe it's not so aggressive, right? Typically, when we want to do, I'll say aggressive rent raises in the peak season, we'll look at about 85% plus occupancy to re-energize those larger rent increases. But you do have to make sure that you're not kicking everyone out, and you don't have the leads to get people moved in.
That's the other thing, man, is making sure you've got the leads, right? Which is huge. Which is something else that I definitely want to talk about is how do we typically drive leads? What are some of our, most effective ways of driving leads to facilities? And then I want to kind of touch a little bit on like the spend, like marketing spend, like how does that look seasonality? So first let's talk about like how do we get leads?
The best way to get a lead is organically, right? Someone just walks into your store and says, hey, I was driving by and it looks like a good facility, right? And you're like, how'd you hear about us? I just drove by. You didn't spend a dime, right? Well, you did spend a dime because you made your facility look good. But, you didn't have actual marketing spend to them. When we look at what is our best way to attract leads is doing everything you possibly can within about a 3-mile radius of getting on the map pack on Google. First thing you can do is SEO, right? And SEO typically is what your tenants or future tenants are looking for. And so you can do a questionnaire like, hey, how did you hear about us? Like, what are our best amenities and that sort of thing? If you don't know, and start building out some of that content blocks on your website, because that's what future tenants are going to be looking for, right? Or you can pay. And you can pay for Google services through their pay-per-click and that sort of thing to get onto the map pack. But if you're not on the map pack, the map pack in today's version And for those who don't know what the map pack is, it's when you Google something and it comes up with the little map, and there's 3 or 4 locations. That's the map pack. Before the map pack, 5-10 years ago, there used to be Google Pages. Google now, you just kind of just keep going down. Like you don't have to go to page 2. But for us old marketing guys, been in for a while, that was the biggest joke, right? Was like, where do you hide a dead body? Like page 2 of Google, right? Because no one got to page 2. Like they would scroll down, and if you weren't on the first page, you might as well not be on Google.
Yeah.
That's happening now with the map pack, right? And the map pack, Google has a ton of algorithms. And so to really understand where you're at in the map pack, you really need to have a search done when you're at or by the facility. We sometimes, I don't have any hair to pull out, but there are people here who pull their hair out because they will search for one of our facilities here in Boise for a facility in Oklahoma. And they're like, we're not in the map pack, And I go, well, if I pull up this special software I use and I have the IP of Oklahoma, we're number 3. But because we're doing that search in Boise, that algorithm is different, right?
Yeah, makes total sense.
So you have to put your consumer hat on and do the search where your consumers are if you have facilities that are outside of your current location.
It's a great point.
And so I hear it a lot, typically from Mr. AJ. Just the other day he sent me a text in the middle of the night, and I had to remind him. And
we're not showing up.
And he just replied, "Weird, thanks." But
that's funny.
But yeah, you have to, and you can do this. You can find websites to do it, and it will make you sleep better at night knowing that when you do a search within about a 3-mile radius of your property, where do you land, right? And the further you get, and especially in congested areas, you may land a little bit further back. If you're right on your property, you probably be number 1. But how many customers are going to be sitting on your property and do a Google search, right? Yeah. So you want to get down the street a little bit and do those searches and just see where you're at, because like they said in real estate back in the day, I guess they still do, location. It's still the same thing in the digital space, but the location is now on a 3.5-inch screen because everyone is on mobile.
That's so true. I mean, what percentage of people are like not coming from mobile?
Exactly. I mean,
very minimal.
95% of our traffic is coming in through mobile, and that's leads and tenants. There are other sites out there like Sparefoot, part of Storable, that you can pay to play in their system, and we call that third-party acquisition sites. Me coming from the hospitality industry, I liken it to the Expedia of storage. They buy up a bunch of keywords and that sort of thing. So if someone says storage in Mississippi, Storable or Sparefoot will come up, and people will think that that's your site. But really it's a third party. It's like Expedia. And then you have to kind of pay to play. And so we use those at certain facilities. We don't do them for all. We have in the past. It's been very, very viable for us. And probably maybe segue into cost of acquisition for leads a little bit, because when I'm talking with operators, there's this thought in people's head that you have to pay about $100 per customer. And it's funny, when I go to conferences, the first thing people ask is, how much is your 10 by 10? And I go, what market you talking about?
Yeah, for sure.
What market you in? And it's like, well, a 10 by 10 in Coeur d'Alene is going to be a lot different than a 10 by 10 in, Oklahoma City versus Tulsa versus Arizona versus Reno, right? Yeah. And so I do think it's funny that, a lot of operators like compare themselves to other operators by their price of their 10 by 10, right? And if I had a storage in Manhattan, I'd be like, it's $450.
Exactly. Like, what? Where is that?
Same thing with leads, though. People have this thought in their head that they should be paying between $100 and $150 per lead, right? And that would be a good target. That's kind of the target we're in for our PPC, for our Google ad spend. But if you're using third-party websites like Sparefoot, you're going to pay a little bit more.
Yeah.
And, typically they charge you have to do like a bidding process where you have to bid how many months times. So it starts off at like 1.5 or 1.75 months, and then to rank higher in that area, you could be paying in some locations it was like 12 or 13 months.
We saw some craziness.
Like you're giving Spare Foot a full year of rent up front.
Yeah. And lifetime value, that person's probably not even close to.
And I'm glad you brought it up, right? Because that's going to tell you if you're winning the game or not. And I always liken marketing to, and again, I'm a sports guy, but I liken it to playing sports, right? You have a campaign, you know what you want to do, but you have to always have the halftime to measure how you're doing to make sure in the second half you can win the game. And lifetime value is one of those. And the way that we look at our lifetime value is and I typically do this on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on if people are reading my analytics or not. Because sometimes they're like, Jesse, stop. You're giving us too many numbers. Just tell us what we should do.
Jesse's going off the rails.
Yeah, Jesse's going off the rails. There he is in his Excel spreadsheets again.
Yeah.
But I pull all the move-outs for a store in our portfolio, and I look at the people in a certain move-out period, and I look at how long they stayed with us. And what I do to be conservative is I look at their move-in rent, and I multiply their move-in rent by how many months they stayed. I know we've done rent raises and everything else, right? But if I take their move-out rate, it's going to skew, right? So I always want to be very, very conservative. And so if they've been with us for 12 months and they paid us $300, that's like $3,600 lifetime value, right? So if I'm looking at a customer, now they've moved out, I need to now fill that unit, right? I need to look at how much I'm willing to pay, knowing, and again, if you look at the segment, and it always comes down to segmenting your audiences, and if you're not quite sure of how much you want to spend, look at the lifetime value of that unit type. And you'll be able to see that paying $300-$400 for a unit that's going for $300 a month is not a big deal, you know.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have this mind block that it has to be about $100. So then they won't spend the money to make the money, if that makes sense.
Yep.
You know, and again, you have to average it out because you can't go on Spare Foot and just bid on 20 by 10s and that sort of thing. You have to average it out. But if you're paying 3 or 4 times, you're going to make money. Yeah, you're going to have to spend the money up front, but typically we look at our length of stay. Our length of stay is, and again, you have to kind of trim, because the last thing you want to do is have someone who's been there for 8 years and now you think all of your people stayed there for 4 years because there's people been there for a month. But I do an exercise where I do a couple different trimming methods and that sort of thing to really boil down to what is our current segment staying in those unit types. And, if it's 12, 13, 14 months, I'm not concerned if someone stays for 3 months and leaves, right? And we've paid a acquisition fee or that sort of thing, because I know it's going to average out, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to get to at the end of this is the more that you know your numbers, the more confident you're going to be. When you don't know the numbers and you see that you've paid a Spare Foot, let's say you paid him a 5X and the guy moved out the next month, and now in your head you're like, well, I'm not using Spare Foot anymore because I paid 5 months and he only stayed 2, I'm losing money. You really have to understand all of your data to make sure that you are spending your money in the right places and you're spending the right amounts. Because it always comes back down to channel attribution, like where you're closing your best leads, that's where you should focus, right? Because I know a lot of operators, a lot of other marketers, they try and do too much.
Makes sense.
And if you're trying to do too much, especially if you're a single site facility, like you got to pick your battles, right? You don't have marketing people on staff, and you don't have a revenue guy on staff, and that sort of thing. So you really have to pick your battles, and you have to say, okay, what is going to be, my time is worth something.
Yeah.
What is it going, where should I focus, right? And so I guess at the end of the day, data, and I know we brought up Tenant Inc. 1,000 times now, but they give us the ability to see where our leads are coming through in their lead reports and stuff. And so now we can start to segment and be like, okay, we got 20 leads this month for this store, and 15 came from Google PPC. Like, I'm going to focus on Google PPC, right?
Yeah.
I'll have other marketing things out there, but I'm really not going to spend day to day on those other things if I know that Google PPC is running those leads to me.
Yep.
But then again, you may get 15 leads from Google PPC, and you may be getting 5 from Spare Foot from a leads. You're only closing 2 on Google and you've closed 5 out of 5 on Sparefoot. Again, data drives decisions. Now you're saying, I'm getting a ton of leads, but they're not good leads. Sparefoot, I've gotten 5, I've closed 100%. I'm going to spend more money on Sparefoot. So again, it always comes down to data.
Dude, that's such a good point. So many amazing things to unpack through all of that. The data-driven decisions, huge. Being able to identify where to spend your focus and your time. I mean, you have like a limited amount of resources with an unlimited amount of options, right, to go out and execute on. So it's like, which one do you choose really helps identify where you need to be spending that focus and that time and that money. So many good things there. And like you said, it's an investment, up front when we're thinking about those customer acquisition costs. It's not just the cost, it's an investment in that lifetime value, really making sure that you're looking at, okay, well, if I spend $300, yeah, I'm fine because I'm going to get 2,000. Like, it's totally okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the averages, kind of doing the averages of the averages, all those bits and pieces to make sure you're really looking at those metrics and talking about that, both from like a marketing and a rate and revenue management standpoint. Like, what are the metrics that matter? Like, what should I, as an operator or manager or owner, what should I be looking at for both of those?
Yeah, we obviously here at Cedar look at a ton of metrics.
All of them.
All of them. And sometimes you scratch your head, right? Because you're just like,
So much info.
The story sometimes, like you think the story would unfold a certain way and it doesn't. But, when we look at like our key performance indicators, especially when it comes to revenue optimization and that sort of thing, on the daily, I pull reports and I send them to leadership. We have how many leads came in on an average per day for that month. We have move-ins versus move-outs. We have move-in rent versus move-out rent. So we can see, hey, we're plus 88 move-ins, but our move-in rent maybe only be $450 more than our move-out because we've had people moving in at lower rates than people moving out, right? And so we look at overall occupancy at every store. We look at overall closing rates. So we look at how many leads per store come in and how many we're closing. And if we're under I'll say a 50% threshold, it kind of gives me a flag. But if we're over 70, then, I'm giving kudos out there, right? And so, we're looking between 50 and 70% as our closing ratio to really say that the store is doing, is on par to do well. If they're under 50, now I'm starting to see my acquisition costs not paying off because I'm paying for a lot of leads and we're not getting the move-ins. So now we have to start looking at why they're not moving in, right? And, sometimes it's just your facility is in a bad location or it's hard to get to. So people find you. That's great. But then they can't find you. Like they find you digitally.
Right.
But then they can't find you physically.
End up going to a different facility.
And they end up going to a different facility.
They can see.
And that does happen a lot. And unfortunately, you're not going to win the war on all of them. And that's why I give it that 50%, because even though they have price discovery, they know what our price is. If they're going down the street and they have to make a left into traffic to go to our store or make a right across the street to go into a REIT, the REIT's going to win, right? Because they're going to be like, oh, they got a better price, but these people are easier to get to. And so
true.
You can't look at every lead and be like, I should be batting 1,000. It's not going to happen. There are going to be reasons why they get to the store and it just doesn't work out for them. And typically it is based on we say this a lot, right? They have to cross a river or cross a highway, go on a bridge or something, and in the back of their mind they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that, right? And so convenience is a big factor. But looking at your key performance indicators, you want to make sure, well, and again, there's some seasonality in it, right? And that's why we track it over month and year to date to make sure that we're winning the war there. But you really want to make sure that the leads coming in cover the renters going out as far as the overall money is on the table.
You made a really good point. That's something I really want to make sure and call out is that closing ratio percentage, because a lot of times, and we've seen this too, is we're getting all of these leads, but we're not seeing the move-ins. And the idea is immediately that there's something wrong with the leads. And it's like, well, no, what happens in the middle? Like, what is that customer journey through the whole process? We might be getting a number of amazing, quality leads coming through the funnel and getting to the facility or getting to the phone or whatever. But then what happens at that point and what's stopping them from actually moving in? Super, super important. So make sure that, again, you need to be looking at various metrics. You don't always have to check every single box, but at least be looking at, 3-4 different metrics to really be able to make an educated, data-driven decision like you were talking about to say, okay, well, yeah, we've got quality leads. It's not that, okay, closing percentage. Yeah, okay, well, I found out no one is calling any of these leads. I found out that the phone number doesn't work. It's going to the wrong place, or the website link didn't work, or you end up finding problems elsewhere that leads to, therefore, solving your problem. So
and again, technology helps that gap. I mean, there are more and more people renting online. One of our biggest hurdles right now on our website, if you want to rent, is you have to scan your ID. And people get to that part and either like my wallet's in my truck or my wallet's downstairs and I'm upstairs, or there's a myriad of reasons of why they get stuck at that point, right? And so they'll leave the booking window. We're lucky, again, Tenant Inc. Say it 1,000 times. Sponsored by Tenant Inc. But what happens is if someone abandons the cart, they send us a hot task right away and say, this person abandoned the cart. And we know like they were in the booking flow, right? So like that is immediately jump on that, call them, figure out what happened. Because we have other ways of allowing them to send us their ID, or at least get them to sign the lease, give us the money, and then just say, hey, and you can't access, you won't get gate codes and that sort of thing until you give us your ID, right? So when you show up at the facility, come in here, I'll help you with it, but at least get the rental, right?
Exactly.
And I do think there are a ton of operators out there that are just losing out because they don't have the technology to say, hey, someone was on your site and willing to spend money.
Yes.
It's just they hit one blockade. I liken to a story that the CEO of Tenant was telling me, Lance Watkins. And he was just like, he goes, I remember when like operators were like, oh, you want to store your boat? We need to know the engine outboard number and registration. And he was like, how many people were like, I'm not going to do all that. Like, I'm just going to go to Bob's.
Yeah, exactly right. Shout out Bob's.
I'm just going to go to Bob's and he doesn't care, right? And again, we're all human. And if you give us any walls to try and break through, there are some people who won't break through walls. I mean, look at Connor. He breaks through walls. Me, not so much. So
I don't know. Breaking down walls all over the place in here all the time, man.
So that's another thing. Just look at your friction points, and when it comes to the leads, secret shop, call your store. Yeah, act like a lead, because you're gonna find that at some point in time there may be people at your facility, they're just order takers, right? Yep. Hey, I need a 10 by 10. We don't have any. Okay, bye. And you're just like, you didn't offer them a 12 by 10?
Dude, yeah, we had...
You didn't offer them
15 10 by 20s, like ready to go.
Right? And again, right, you got 15 10 by 20s, be like, hey, I'll actually upgrade you into a 10 by 20 and give you the 10 by 10 price, right?
Yes.
Get them to move in. And then you can start your revenue optimization, your rent increases and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the key is to get people to move in, to sign the lease, because once they put their stuff in the unit, even if they don't fill up the unit, if you give them a rental increase, like odds are they're going to be like, again, we're human. I'm not going to move. Like, I'll just pay it, right?
Yeah.
Bend don't break.
5 extra bucks a month, like whatever.
Bend don't break, right? And the one thing that we haven't talked about, which I think has really helped us with occupancy, especially in the wintertime. And again, I used to have hair, so this was another tribute to me going bald with the stress, is we allow our managers to do rental decrease forms.
Yeah.
And so if someone's moving out, and again, this helps the on-site staff because they don't have to take the brunt of it. They can be like, hey, we'll help you through this. Like, we'll send it up to the home office. Like, how much are you willing to pay? And so the guy's paying $180 for a 10 by 10, which is super high. And he's like, holy cow, like over the years, I've got all these rent increases. Now I'm paying $180. and they go, how much are you willing to pay? And he's like, if you can knock $30 off at 150, and we may be selling them for 120. It's like, yeah, all day long, I approve, right?
Yep.
Where in the past, when we didn't allow that, they would just move out. And now we bring someone in at 120, and that $30 gap, that runway to get $30 could take a year and a half, 2 years, right? Where all it took was someone to, say, hey, how much are you willing to pay? And us putting it down. Now, some people take advantage of it, right? And they're getting a $300 unit, and they say, I'll pay 50, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at it, and I, put a little bit of red on there and say declined. But hey, and then we have home office call them, right? So it's not the specialist that has to call them on site. I mean, we're fortunate to have a home office that can do that. And so the pressure is now off the on-site team, and we can call them from the home office and say, hey, we ran the numbers and it just doesn't make any sense, right? We're sorry.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how many people are like, I know, I was just trying it. Like, I'm good. Like, and they stayed a couple more months, right? And it's just giving them that option sometimes. It's like flexibility. And again, the lowest cost of acquisition is retention.
No, that's fantastic.
Right?
Yeah.
Just retention. Yep. Customer service. And sometimes people just, they want to push boundaries, but when push comes to shove, they really don't want to spend their weekend moving out of a 20 by 20.
No, you're exactly right, man. Such a phenomenal point. This has been a really good podcast, man. It really gives everybody a good idea on the metrics that we're looking at and how we navigate through all the seasonal changes. Because, we've got the busy season. We've got these ebbs and flows that really, throughout the year, and you can see a 10, 20% change in occupancies and all these different swings that you go through. And it can be kind of, especially if it's your first season going through any of this stuff, probably be pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
If you're just on your own out there, on an island and trying to figure things out. Hopefully you're getting engaged in all the resources that we've got for you guys. Don't hesitate to, connect with us and reach out if you guys have questions and so on and so forth. And be sure you're checking out this technology like we were just talking about. Make sure that you guys are looking at those property management systems, integrating the technologies that will allow you to, better retain your customers, to better serve them, to get those leads to move in. All those different metrics, man, it really makes a ton of sense. And like you said, there's no like silver bullet. There's really not. It's just all of those little incremental things put together that then, creates your quote unquote silver bullet that really makes your facility succeed or otherwise.
You're totally right. And you made a statement in the podcast where you said something about like, there's no shining arrows pointing to what you need to do. Right?
Yeah.
And, I remember growing up and I was in a meeting and someone was like, we just need to know what to do. And they're like, well, then it wouldn't be a decision. It'd be a foregone conclusion, right? But sometimes you got to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess if there's one thing to take away from what we discussed today is test, get in an Excel worksheet, be a little bit of a nerd, segment and test, right? You don't have to take what we're saying and apply it to your entire portfolio or your entire store. You can segment, test, and see what works, right? In a future podcast, probably Connor should talk about all the SOPs that we've done. Because again, it came from testing and coming up with standard operating procedures, because at the end of the day, like that's going to make you rise amongst your competition when everyone's saying the same thing and doing the same things.
Exactly right. Well, Jesse, thanks so much for your time today, man. Phenomenal episode. Really great information. You guys make sure and check out the links in the show notes below to a lot of these things we've talked about today, and get out there and crush it, everybody.